and welcome to the Centre for Brexit Studies YouTube channel. Today we're joined by our senior fellow, Dr. Stephen McCabe. So Steve, countries across Europe are starting to ease lockdown measures, with the number of deaths in Italy at its lowest level since just after its lockdown began 2 months ago. What are you expecting Boris Johnson to say this week about lockdown measures potentially being eased?
Well, clearly we're seeing a sort of a lessening off of the infections and of course the sort of consequential death rates, which is a really good thing, and perhaps not surprising given that in many European countries and this country also, people have been by and large at home and staying safe. I kind of hesitate because I think our lockdown was somewhat less severe than was seen in sort of the likes of Italy, Spain and France, where in the sort of the latter you had to have a sort of piece of paper if you wanted to go out. So what we are expecting to see from Boris Johnson, and I believe it's on Sunday, he was due to say this today, but I think that they're probably giving themselves another sort of couple of days to work through the figures and see what comes out. And there's the whole debacle about sort of testing, but nonetheless we expect to see some sort of easing off of the sort of the regulations on Sunday. And if I can just sort of quickly sort of summarise that, so apparently there will be some flexibility around the sort of social distancing rule, but the caveat being as long as firms are taking other steps to protect workers. And this may sort of involve screens, strict hygiene procedures, wiping down, making sure that people are not too close together for long periods of time, people having to sort of look at sort of new, or the employers looking at rotas, staggering starts to finish times. That this also, of course, to avoid masses of people also trying to go to work at the same time, because anybody who's ever been into any sort of major town or city will know that sort of the big rush is between probably about 7:30 and 9 o'clock. So that there's going to be a lot of things there. So, sorry, just to finish off, hot desking will sort of have to end, and people won't share equipment, and those people are sort of vulnerable, either remain at home or put into sort of roles, you know, if they can't stay at home, being put in roles where they're least likely to sort of be put at risk. And indeed, I think the government are sort of saying for the very foreseeable future, those people who can continue to work at home should do so. But by and large, what this really does mean is that this is an awful lot of thinking about the sort of the issues that need to be sort of contemplated before firms can sort of have people back. So the idea that, you know, we all were sent home on whatever day it was in sort of the late March, that everyone suddenly comes back. Well, we know that's not going to happen, but even to get people back on a partial basis requires a fair bit of thought. And it's very interesting, sort of the head of the TUC, Frances O'Grady, she's written to Alex Sharma, the business secretary, saying, well, you know, she's going to recommending that if companies have not properly thought these things through, then they may be putting people's lives at risk. And of course, quite literally, as we know, with coronavirus, if you sort of get it, then there is always the sort of the outside possibility that you could die. So yeah, this is, yeah, it's obviously highly unprecedented and really difficult. So I don't see a sort of a massive rush back to work. And if we look at sort of an example of how this may happen, I suspect that we'll probably end up with a similar plan to the that was presented by the Irish government last week. And if you look at that, it provides a number of phases, and it's a very sort of gradual easing back of people into both the workplace and into sort of to normal society, or sort of something resembling society, which would be much different to what we've got now, but certainly very different to sort of the situation that used to be only a couple of months ago.
So a draft government plan to ease lockdown restrictions says that the government will urge employers to minimise numbers using equipment, as you just said, staggering shift times, maximising home working. How easy do you think it could be for all of us to go back to a normal working environment after this? And surely the rules are actually going to be different depending on what your working environment actually is.
Well, quite clearly, I mean, to take this at the last point first, if you work on, I don't know, construction site, for instance, and you're out in the open air, your chance of sort of being very close to someone in a sort of confined environment are very different to, for example, somebody working in a restaurant where you have the catering staff working in the sort of the kitchens, probably bumping into one another and certainly sort of breathing the same air. Again, another case in point is airplanes. You know, we don't see sort of normality returning there anytime soon. I think the real difficulty in all of this is that, because of course this is as the word I used was unprecedented. We've never been through this before, and in a sort of modern industrialized society such as we exist in, the idea that somehow we've got something such as a virus that has created the sort of the crisis that we're sort of experiencing because of its effects, its contagious effects, and dare I say it, the one thing, and I know this may not come as much comfort, a mortality rate of, it's still very early days, estimated probably between 1 maybe 2%. It really depends upon the circumstances and the sort of the people involved. Imagine if this was a sort of something that had a much higher mortality rate. The difficulty coming back to sort of to getting or to what employers face is having to sort of to properly consider all of the sort of the attendant risks. And of course, many people have criticised the health and safety executive and the sort of the culture in which we exist as being risk averse. Well, okay, I can see some of the sort of the sentiment in that particular argument. I may not agree with it, of course, but this is a clear case in point that if you bring people back to work and you expose them through perhaps no fault of your own, but because you didn't take all the necessary procedures, and then obviously control your workers in such a way as that sort of they adhere to them, and somebody gets this, and God forbid that they die, I could see a potential where families may sort of bring, as they call them in America, lawsuits, and sort of sue the company or the sort of the organisation, because of course there are huge difficulties, and I think that the big challenge is to sort of to properly think this thing through. And actually, if I may just add as a conclusion, I think some companies may say this just isn't worth the hassle until we can be a lot more certain of, the big certainty is going to be a vaccine or sort of the treatments that they use to sort of to deal with it. The expense and the sort of the potential for sort of for risk may be so great. To repeat myself, it's just not worth it.
So Michael Gove has unveiled a customs agent academy and is talking to businesses to set up plans to train 50,000 form fillers for post-Brexit trade. Do you think this is a sign of what's to come post-Brexit, and does this show more signs that we could be heading towards a no deal?
Well, I mean, to talk about the sort of chronology, that the original plan, and we have to accept the sort of deadlines in the EU, sometimes flexible, was that sort of by the end of June they would have a sort of a sense check of where they're getting to. My reading of the situation in the sense is that sort of that not much is being achieved, understandably, because of course the main priority for every government in Europe, including the UK quite clearly, is dealing with the current crisis. But undoubtedly, the sort of the idea of this customs academy of training form fillers. I mean, okay, in the current climate, creating 50,000 jobs would be quite some achievement, and it is no bad thing. So that's the positive aspect. What it perhaps does suggest to you is that it may be a contingency, so that if there is a hard Brexit, that they're ready to go. It does beg the question: we're talking about sort of 8 months from now, so less than 8 months before we get to the end of this year, if indeed we end up with a hard Brexit. And indeed, even so, that there will, whether we have a hard Brexit or not, we'll be entering into a different sort of regime. But it does bode, well, does not bode well, I should sort of say, in terms of where this is going to end up. And again, given that sort of that we're going to experience a big hit to the economy as a result of the sort of the COVID-19 crisis, that the sort of the view is that no matter how people sort of spin this, that hard Brexit, if that's what indeed we do end up with, will take another umpteen% off the sort of the economy. I personally am not sort of sold on the sort of the idea that we're going to make up all the sort of the lost trade with Europe and replace it with America. I mean, nonetheless, whatever may happen in the longer term, it will cause a sort of an additional blow to many businesses at a time when they're reeling from the current crisis. So it's, I don't see it as a good thing. But who knows? Maybe it's part of the sort of the, if you like, the sort of the theatrics and the sort of the choreography I'm going to sort of march my troops up to the top of the hill, and my 50,000 form fillers, I'll raise you on that. Interesting, I did actually sort of look at something, and the whole of the sort of the European Commission, I think it's something like 32,000 bureaucrats, so we would exceed that and some, but it shows the sort of the nature of the way that this thing is going. So Brexit is certainly sort of a very live issue and will become more so as the year goes on.
Thanks for joining us, Steve.